Hi, I'm Derek Bermel. I'm the artist in residence here, as many of you know, and perhaps some of you don't know, at the Institute for Advanced Study. And it is a great pleasure to be introducing the second of these writers series, and decided to expand the definition today. So we have two wonderful creative artists with us. Vincent Katz here, poet, essayist, curator, critic. I don't know what else. Many filmmaker. I don't know. There's many things, and most important, collaborator. And Alex Katz, renowned painter and lithograph maker. What else can we call you? I don't know.
That's enough.
That's enough, right? Yeah. We were going to talk a little bit about collaboration, because both of you have collaborated with many people in many different genres of the arts, and as well as with each other. So maybe we could just start off with the collaborations that you've done with each other. I thought might be interesting. I know, Vincent, you brought with you this beautiful laptop with images and other things.
I did, yeah. I made a PowerPoint show of some of the. Well, my father has. First of all, let me say thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting us. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I would like to add a little personal note, which is that Derek and I met at the American Academy in Rome when we were both fellows there. And my father was also a resident there at an earlier time, so we have that connection among us, which I think is really great. But this show has some of the books that my father has done with poets, and some books that I have done with other visual artists, and then there are the projects that we've done together. But I just wanted to point out at the beginning also that, and I think this could be of interest to you, Derek, that my father has done quite a few collaborations in the dance world, most principally with the Paul Taylor Dance Company. He designed sets and costumes for a number of pieces. So that might be something you want to discuss,
yeah, sure,
too. That's not part of the PowerPoint, though.
And well, I think it's whenever there's a visual artist brings a lot to dance, to any of the performing arts. So well,
Should
show
we
us what
start
you
with
got.
this?
Yeah, as they say.
Okay, let's see if I can get this going. So this is, I think, your first collaboration on a book, no? Or did you do?
Yeah, I don't know. I think so.
You did one with John Ashbery around the same time.
Yeah, I think this was the first one.
Do you want to tell how that came about?
Kenneth Koch. I guess he first asked me to do. He asked me. Anyway, with this, he asked me to collaborate with him, and he came over, and he wanted to me to make a drawing, and he erase it and write on it, like he'd been doing with Larry Rivers. And I said, we did it for a little while, and I said, you're not going to mess up my drawings. This doesn't work. And then I figured this thing of making these cartoons with empty balloons. And I said, you fill in the words. And he said, no matter what I do, I can't make it better than the empty balloons. Right? He thought the empty balloons were great. And 3 years later, he came up with, is it 4 stories?
I think it's 5.
5 stories. He made 5 stories, changing what the people in the cartoons were doing. And it's like deconstructed the artwork. The artwork had no reality whatsoever as what you think you were looking at. And the stories are kind of terrific.
Wait, so what came first here?
Well, the drawings. I handed him a bunch of drawings for him to fill in the balloons, and 3 years later, he destroyed the drawings with his writing.
See, well, see, I think it's fascinating because usually it would be the other way around. I mean, books are illustrated, or I mean, and you've done collaborations. Which
Well,
are the
you
other
never
way.
know. I'm just who did what first. I mean, the idea of doing literal illustrations for me is uninteresting. Period. It's sort of, I think, insanity to illustrate Dante's Inferno. You have so many pictures in your face, you know.
Just by virtue of the text.
By the virtue of the text, yeah.
I think it's funny. I sometimes find that people have a very cut and dried definition of what collaboration is, and what I think they have in mind is something where two people have a lot of back and forth, and they're getting together and throwing this out and throwing that out. But I think there are projects I've found where it's just really finding the right elements and then combining them into that object that becomes a work of art. So it's a very different process. And then definitely there's, in the projects that I've been involved with and ones that I've witnessed by others, it goes either way. Like sometimes there were a number of, the poet Robert Creeley collaborated with a number of visual artists, and particularly in his later years I noticed that a lot of them, he was responding to the art in his poetry, and sometimes very directly commenting on it.
So, but you both work, I mean, you've published 9 books of poetry, you've made thousands of paintings. What's the difference when you're collaborating in the process?
You're doing something else, and with the book, it's sort of an intellectual exercise. And you have the history of book illustrations that you're sort of trying to work out and destroy.
It's all about destruction. But
Yeah.
is there like an incompleteness? I mean, because this is something I've wondered when I work in music. When I see a text and someone says, "Oh, you have to set Annabelle Lee," or something like this.
Well, I think the
what
literal.
would you do?
I don't know. It depends what the form is. I think in a good collaboration, you get a kind of energy you wouldn't get by yourself. You get more energy, and with two, it becomes that. This thing has a ton of energy.
But did he ever say to you, I can't...
Well...
Because that would happen with, say, Paul Taylor.
Yeah, well, we happened with... Can I tell the story, the end of it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
How did it end? How did it all end?
Well, with Kenneth, every time I did a collaboration with him on theater, he sold me out, Well, the first one I did was he gave me a play, George Washington Crossing the Delaware, and I read it and I said, this play is totally two-dimensional. He's written it for children, and it's a terrific piece of writing, but it's two-dimensional. And then I got a director, and I said, they wanted me to do cutouts, sets of cutouts for the play, and it seemed perfect, these two-dimensional pieces in a two-dimensional play. So I said, well, let's put it on a 3-foot stage, make it flat, and we'll just have colors behind them, and do the whole play on 3 feet. And they said, that's a terrific idea, Alex. And then I go to rehearsal, and it's in 3D. The director wants 3D, wants volumetric space, And so I felt sold out.
Sold you down the Delaware River.
Sold me down the Delaware River. And it was a big success, the play. And one point...
Even worse.
One point the director wanted a big thing in the middle of the stage. I don't know, a staircase to a platform. And I said to the producer, who was running on a shoestring, I said, they just said, this is what you have to build. And I said to the producer, I'd be very happy to build it for $500. And the producer went back to the director and said, Mr. Katz's aesthetic ideas are superior to yours. He didn't have $500. So I ended up with the sets. But anyhow, the amount of energy you get from what you put in gets quadrupled on theater. And I think with the poetry, it gets doubled at least. You put in this much energy and you get that much back.
Does it change when you think?
It's another
when you see the piece, then do you want to change it?
What do you mean? Like
a piece of theater, you see it in rehearsal, does it suddenly want to change?
No, it's out of your hands. a lot of it, you know. It's like a runaway locomotive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you can describe theater, and if it works together, you get all the things fit right. It's like an amazing amount of energy you get back, you know. And the books are a little more removed, but they're kind of exciting because you go in areas you've never been in. You know, that's kind of exciting. No, I mean the whole idea of making a bunch of cartoons with it. And anyway, with Kenneth, then we did Red Robins, and he assured me I could have my way. And I said, I want to put a whole bunch of big red robins across 50 feet of the stage, and the actors will be behind them. Isn't that interesting? And you see bits of their heads pop out. And he says, oh, that's a terrific idea. That's okay. The play comes on, the actors are in front of the set. So I said to Kenneth, you know, I said, Kenneth, don't bother me with anything anymore. And then Kenneth is in Texas dying with some blood disease. And I'm calling him up. Kenneth is like, I think, a fabulous artist. I'm calling him up, and they're changing his blood and everything. And I said, listen, Kenneth, if you get out of this, we'll do another one. So
that killed him.
3 months later, he knocks on my door. It says, okay, Alex, what about the thing we're going to do? So I go into shock, and I say, come back. And I decide that what I want to do is make circles, little circles, dots on a piece of paper. And every page, the dot will move. And it'll finally come to a thing that means something, delete, you know, with all these dots. And Kenneth looks at it and his face falls, and he says, Alex, why don't you do some flowers for pretty girls, and I could write some terrific stuff. And I say to Kenneth, Kenneth, you're the only person in the world who could make art out of these dots, you know? And I didn't get him. The flattery didn't help, and Kenneth just looked at me, and he was very depressed. And I walked into the subway, and we were talking about dying, you know, which is uninteresting to me and paramount to him. And 3 months later, he's hooked, and he comes up with this great text. So we made this book, and that was the end of the story with Kenneth. It was a lot of fun, and it's true. I don't think anyone could have come up and do anything out of that stupid idea I had.
It was his last book, and it was
his last book.
It was called Primus Inter Pares, which he translated as "to be the first one there." That's every other line was "to be the first one there."
Wow. So some of these pictures.
It's like a competition.
Would you mind reading one of the things that go
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't quite read them. Maybe somebody else could.
Well,
read it.
let's see if I can come over and do this. When they got his car in the garage, they were completely ignorant as to what made it run. They talked about it in loud voices. The next day, Timmy was out driving with the man with whom she had gone sailing, and in the car, she told him about her dream. He asked her many questions concerning precise details, and at last discovered that Timmy had forgotten to mention the presence of the dog in the dream, which he, the man, believed to be of prime importance. Then Timmy's aunt appeared in the dream sequence and spoke to her threateningly. That night, Timmy had a dream of many of the most important people in her life, swimming on a beach, her father, her mother, her sister, her future son, her future father-in-law, and her future husband. The man she told it to invited her out for a sail. While they were sailing, he made her tell him the story again and again. When Timmy, the girl in the car, grew up, she told the story of what had happened that day to an excited audience. Oh, and there's the beginning. Okay, so we've come full circle.
Read this one. This one's
Okay,
good.
it all began one day when a car containing 3 people converged on a road containing one and a dog. All concerned spoke excitedly. The man in the road didn't move, though. He seemed really unconcerned. I think the little dog was trying to tell him he'd better move. So we get the idea.
Interlocking lives.
Interlocking lives, yeah. And did you give them those? They weren't in a specific order when you gave them to them.
No, I just handed them to him. Yeah.
So go.
So this, we're changing gears a little bit. This is 27 years later, and
I was going to ask you, Vincent, just before you get to this.
Yeah.
What? Now you have collaborated. You obviously we're talking about your collaboration with someone who is almost dead. Now you've actually collaborated with dead people, because you've translated works,
in that way, yeah.
Latin work. I mean, talk about translating, because that's a type of
terrific.
collaboration in a way.
Yes, I've translated Greek and Latin poets, and particularly the Roman poet Sextus Propertius. I translated his complete poems, published by Princeton University Press, no less. And,
well, we don't necessarily. I'm just kidding. We love Princeton.
Yeah, I guess it is a kind of collaboration. You're thinking this poet, you start to not identify with him, but to really become involved with his work. And then, as a poet oneself, you realize, well, this is kind of great. If I were, if this were 2,000 years from now and somebody were translating my poetry
Did you think that?
into some language that doesn't exist now. I didn't think of it until now, but it's, but I did, very much empathize with him as a figure. And I think you need that for translation is such a labor-intensive process. It's almost like biography. You really has to be somebody you really want to spend a lot of time with. It's different from collaboration in a way, which is a little bit, collaboration with a living person. It's a little bit more fluid and.
Can you remember anything? Can you read a piece of that?
I don't have it.
You can't memorize it. Oh, okay.
He always wants me to perform, but I'm not a performer.
Well, because you also, you know a lot about music from a very personal place, because you studied music.
That's true, yeah. I
you
did study music.
He's a musician.
Yeah. So, that's also, does it come into the work?
Well, it definitely comes into poetry. Poetry is very much about music, but I think also it comes in when you think about presenting your work to an audience, and then I think I'm always aware of how the words are sounding, how the rhythms. I did some readings that were totally memorized, where I really tried to get inside the language.
And here's one of your, you work with Rudy Burckhardt. You've spent a lot of time thinking about his work.
I have. You have curated exhibitions of his work, and we did 2 books together. This was the second book. He was born in 1914 in Basel, so we're from very different times and places, but he's somebody who had a lot of younger friends who were artists and had a lot of associations with younger people, did many films that included people from many generations. So when the first book we did actually was, we did put things together that already existed, as I said earlier, but we had a concept for it, which was that the works were made around the same time, which was the 1980s. And then sometime later, Rudy said, well, I have these photographs that nobody's really seen. Maybe you'd like to write some poems for them. And they turned out to be this amazing series that he did in New York, in the streets in the late 30s, 1930s. And so the concept for that book was different. It was that when he did the photos and when I wrote the poems, we were more or less the same age, although actually he was younger. He was in his 20s when he did the photos. That's the cover. And I really like this book a lot, and my wife Vivian, who's here, who's a photographer, did the design for it.
And you made the film together too, right?
We made a film. We've made a film about my father, and we made a film about Rudy as well, yeah.
Can you read a little bit?
Yeah, so you can see in these poems, I'm really writing about the photos. A dull shoe steps on Rudy's shoulder. That's his shadow. So this came out of a lot of conversations. We'd go over there, and he really loved to. It was almost like reminiscing, but about artworks. So he'd look at it and say, "Well, that's my shadow," So then I would go home and write, "A dull shoe steps on Rudy's shoulder, 27, looking down at his surrounding, painting more than a Magritte. And then that poem, and probably the photo is on another page, but that almost literally describes the photograph. But I try to condense it and put it into language that becomes poetry.
The first one where you're more focused on him.
Yeah.
The second one more focused on the surrounding that we don't see also.
So there's some pages that have just text and some pages that have just images. Two photographs. It's not one work there. And then we added other sections, and so we finally got to this section of Maine imagery of his, where our family spent the summers since I was a child, and he and his family spent the summers.
Can you read that?
You read it, yeah.
I put bare feet to terra, swim in the lake all day long. There's nothing to do. Listen to wind in the trees. So that's it. I've just put a little selection from each book. It's much more in each one. So interestingly, this is from the same year. This is a different book that you did with the poet Robert Creeley. How did that come about?
I have no idea.
Is it Peter Bloom's idea, the publisher?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I know I did the, might have been Peter Bloom, I guess. He sort of always forcing me to work.
You met Creeley up in Maine, didn't you?
Yeah, I met Creeley up in Maine. He was from another place. He was from San. He was from Black Mountain, and he was with Ginsberg and Olson. And I was mostly with the New York poets, Ashbery, O'Hara. And so it was different, but someone said to meet him. I met him, he's kind of a terrific guy. We got along well. And I think Peter Bloom must have asked me to do it. So what we did was I made a bunch of soft ground etchings of flowers and things, and he made a text for it. And it worked out great. The hardest part was trying to figure out how to make the soft ground etchings, which took months to figure out the technique so it would look effortless.
I mean, you did a lot of work in woodcut as well as
Later.
Yeah,
after
the 80s and 90s.
That's all soft ground etching, and it's very fluid. And you've never seen soft ground lines like that in etching. It doesn't seem like it's, well it wasn't. I have a printer, Dara Simmelink, and she would make suggestions of ways to do it, to get at that line. And we finally got it. And the poem he wrote was really fabulous.
It's a great poem, and it's really not literal at all.
If it's great, let's read it. I don't know.
Read some of it. It's really good.
Vincent can read some of it. I'm not good at
Derek, read it.
Vincent, you're probably the best at reading.
Yeah.
Do you know it?
You're reading great. Read it.
You're reading great, yeah.
Expectably slowed yet unthinking of outside when in, or whether, as ever more than there when everything, anything, will begin again. Trees stay outside one's thought. The water stays stable in its shifting. The road from here to there continues. One is included. Here it all is then, as if expected, waited for and found again. This.
See, he adds a lot to the artwork.
It's pretty high-class poetry.
Pretty high-class poetry.
Well, it opens things up, doesn't it?
I mean, well, it expands the artwork. It's really terrific stuff.
So some of these, the first two books were, the first one was published by a press called Culture Press that was in the 60s and 70s by Lita Hornick. And the second one was done by a gallery, Tibor Donage, that actually they published a lot of collaborations in the 1950s by the New York School poets with some of the artists that they were friends with. But the last one, the Peter Bloom publication, and this one and some of the other ones are a little bit of a different type. They're more what are called artist books, and Edges was in an edition of 30, and this one's in an edition of 70. So they're kind of more rarefied and hard because of that, it's hard for people to see them. They don't have much of a space in the world. So I tried to do, this was a recent book that I tried to do some events for. We did a reading, and I brought the book there. I decided, it's interesting to be able to see it.
I mean, the title means some cell phones, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, actually, this might be of interest to you. These are all poems that I wrote that year that we were in Rome.
Seeing a bunch of people on their cell phone.
And their cell phones,
I mean, it really was, especially to an American at that time. I mean, I remember going out with a bunch of there were 3 Italian friends. We went out in Trastevere, and I sat there while they were texting on their cell phones, and I just thought, this is crazy. This is the future, and here we are. So there you all are twittering to all your friends,
But to give one little sense of collaboration from this project, the publisher, Steve Clay, who does Granary Books, he said that this book took the longest of any book he ever did, and he had said that with a little bit of tone of frustration in his voice, although he's very supportive. And it did take a long time. I mean, I gave the poems to Francesco, and I said, maybe this is something you want to do something with. And lots of time went by, a couple of years, a few years, and then he spent one summer in Amalfi, where his wife is from, and he was way up at the top, 300 steps in this house, and he did a set of watercolors. Anyway, then it went through various permutations to find how it was going to be the size in the book and the paper. Francesco was concerned that it wasn't too fancy, it didn't seem to be too overdone. And then one time, I remember we were having a meeting, more years were going by, and Steve Clay said, this is really, we just have to decide, this is taking such a long time. And Francesco said, you know what, we're very slow, like he meant Vincent and myself, we're very slow, and you're even slower, so everything's going to be fine. I realized
he's Italian, I mean, it takes ages to get the check.
But I realized that's kind of great. I think we have this feeling that we need to rush things out and get things done and hammer it out, and I realized I really like to work that way, in very slow pace.
And both of you described this process of giving somebody something and then them saying no, never, and then they come back in a few months or a few years, and there it is.
Oh, and this was another thing I have to tell about this. Steve doesn't remember this, but at the beginning he said to me, "It'd be great if you hand wrote the whole book, hand lettered it," which I like to do. I'm involved with the visual presentation of poetry. And then Francesco said to me, "Sure, get this pad that I do my watercolors on, and it'll be good because you won't be able to write so smoothly. It'll disrupt the pencil a little bit because it's a little bumpy in the paper. And this is the size that I use, and just go get it." And so I got it, and I did. It felt like hundreds of poems. I mean, I remember like months and months. I was a scribe doing these, just writing out these poems, many more than are in the book. Steve later condensed it a lot. But then when he came back with the watercolors, they were a different size. And I said, "What are you talking about? I wrote out hundreds of poems at this size you told me to write at." And he's like, "Oh, I'm very sorry. I forgot. I used a different size for my watercolors. Aren't they nice?" And they were amazing. There was beautiful watercolors. So I said, "Okay." And then Steve and I said, "Oh, it's no problem. We'll just scan them. We'll pump up the poems. They'll be fine." And Francesco's like, "No, I don't think that will work. It won't look as good. You must rewrite the ones that are going to be in the book." "Okay, fine." And he was right. They had to be redone to look good. That's another
When you were rewriting them, did you change them?
No. I just tried to make them fit the page better than the first time.
Can you read it?
Yeah, that one I can read. Poem. It's very Roman. Maybe you'll feel that. "I could never comprehend the mountains. The snow lay there, and here the motorcycles. Seeing the lights at night is such comfort. Spring returns to the trees. Nature's war is won again. Man's digs in deeper. I see my own vulnerability in my son, but I also see his beauty."
Now, is this possible that I remember that poem? You reading that poem?
Possible, yeah.
There?
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel like I remember that poem. But anyway.
I think another thing I like about collaboration, and this collaboration in particular, is, I mean, this, you know, you remember where you did things, and I remember that I wrote this poem in Naples, and he's from Naples. So, and then I think the final aspect of this book was when he started to paint right on the piece of paper that had the poem already written on it. That really made it all
Okay, I was going to ask which
together.
came first. I mean, because did he leave that space for you to write in?
Oh
or did
yeah,
you-
no, these are, some of the book is like this, where it's just separate things, but then some of them he started to, what really made it work, I think, was when he started to paint on the page. And you see the little, like where he goes over the lettering and it gets a little bit, the ink from the lettering gets blended out. So
Wow.
now we're up to things we did together.
Right.
How did that start?
Well, Peter Bloom came over and said, I would like you to do some woodcuts. And I said, you come to me now when it's 10 years out of fashion? And I said, okay, because it's 10 years out of fashion. And I'd done some woodcuts in the 50s, and I'd carved frames for about 8 years. So there was no technical problem with it. And I wanted to make a woodcut that was not expressionistic and juicy and not dry. That was, so it came from a formal idea. And I started to use, I'd been painting a bunch of double portraits, the way people relate to each other with faces. And I said, well, I'll use them. And then Peter said, well, how are you going to do them? I said, I want to do them with one color. And one color is like an anathema to a print dealer. I mean, you can't sell one color woodcuts. And he said, you can use 4 colors. And when I say you can use 4 colors, I just blow up internally. It's like, 4 colors you eliminate to me? I want to use 100 colors. You know? It's just like war when they say 4 colors. And so I said,
So you don't design CD covers that much.
Yeah. No, it's just 4-color process. So anyhow, I said, I'm doing 1 color. So Peter is a real sport. He'll go with you. And the 1 color ended up costing more than 4 colors because he had to keep reproofing to get the right color, you know, for each thing. Each thing was a little different. And I thought they came out kind of rough, but it was kind of successful all around. And Vincent?
Well, that's a set of woodcuts
Yeah.
that's in a big box portfolio, and then embedded in that, in a little space, is a book.
Oh, yes. Because I believed in only doing work with poets that are live. And since I'm more viable than most of the poets commercially, I wanted them to make an inexpensive book that could be distributed. I didn't like the idea of the French fancy books where they, like Picasso and Miro made, and they're beautiful books. They're this big, and they're totally gorgeous, and they end up on someone's shelf. They never get seen, you know. They disappear, basically, and they're these gorgeous things. Well, if I'm going to put that much work of thing, I'd like to have something that would get the poetry out in the world, and only work with live poets. And I have a certain lack of respect for artists who work with dead poets. Really.
Well, they're much easier to argue
yeah,
with.
I think they should. You should work with live poets, period. And
So I happen to be alive.
yeah,
At the time.
And so Peter said, why don't we make a book where you make a little linoleum cuts, and we can print them on a press that a proof press. So I made a series of about 11 notebook cuts, and he's absolutely marvelous to work with because every state of it, of the visual thing, he would bring to my attention. I mean, the colors on the cover, and then the printer put a line on it, and I said, I don't like the line. that never would have happened with anyone else. He absolutely respects the artist's taste. And so we made this beautiful little book. And I said, Peter, the book is beautiful, but it's too expensive. He says, I'm sorry, I failed. I can't make a cheap book. And that's the story. Do we have the things from
But
Bob?
you suggested using my poetry.
Oh, yeah.
Which
And Peter didn't know what to do with the poetry because he said, you know, he's literate, but he's not an expert. So he didn't know what to do with Vincent's poetry. So he gave it to this Italian dealer whose name is?
Mario Diacono.
Who's a poet. And Mario read them and said, these are real good, you can use them.
Well, in the book it says the poems were selected by Mario. And at the time I didn't really think anything of it, but later I got to know him because Vivian and myself and Vivian's cousin ran a small cafe in Boston that had poetry and things, but we also had food there, and he had a gallery, Mario, and he would come and have lunch there, and he would comment on the macaroni that we would serve him. If it wasn't good, he would tell us. He would say, this is not very good today. Today is too soft, it's not al dente, so I'm sorry. So then I realized that he selected the poems means that they were approved by him. That
Like
he
the
actually,
macaroni.
They were okay.
And you know, one of the things I just like is, you know, this is kind of family affair thing, because you painted so many paintings of your wife. She was a real collaborator. I mean, she was part of the work. I mean, or I don't know if you agree with that. But
I don't know whether I agree with that.
Okay, all right. So she's got nothing to do with it.
No, it's
least an
something to do with it.
inspiration.
It's yeah,
Right,
yeah, yeah.
right. Maybe that's different, right? But also, I mean, you and Vivian have
Oh, that's the
collaborated.
cover. The pink is much paler.
It's hard to get.
That's that little book we made.
So those are linoleum cuts, which are
Yeah.
similar to woodcuts, but
Yeah, just easier to carve into. You want to read one of the poems?
yeah, I'll pick one. Let's see. No, maybe not. Those are two.
Okay.
So this was something, this again came out of the year in Rome. I got to spend some time with the artist Enzo Cucchi, and through him I met a dealer named Roberto Giustini. And so, as it says there, Cucchi and the designer Ettore Sozzas were doing this thing that they called a magazine, but the magazine is in ceramic tablets that come in a box. So they had different people doing them, and they wanted us to do one. So this is what we did. And I remember that deciding on the surfaces of the tablets and the colors and the tree was very detailed. Do you remember that?
Yeah, well, they had other people do them, and most of the guys with the ceramic went into different levels and stuff and made it a little designy. And these are like really kind of real simple, basically.
So there are
What
four.
does that say there?
That side just says, "Did you?" And so this came out of a series. It's interesting to see a lot of the works that you do in these collaborations relate to your paintings.
Yeah,
And you were
just take them
doing
out of the paintings. The images came right out of the paintings I was doing.
It's same with the Tremor in the Morning that we just saw. There was a building that relates to a painting you did. This is the other side of the tablets.
What do those say?
Would you lie with me in the fields? Did you lie? Lying in the fields.
Oh, boy.
How did that come about?
That was pretty bizarre. It was your idea.
Oh, good. I love this piece.
And it was a thing that I had to publish it myself. So when I looked at his idea, I said, there goes a couple of $1,000 anyway.
I thought it was your idea.
Oh, it wasn't my idea.
There's plenty of blame
I'll take
to go
credit
around.
for it.
Oh, it's pretty good.
It's a large print. It's a multimedia print. And it's like about this high. And I'll read it, cabin, a table on which to work, a bed on which to sleep.
That's it. the wood is grain, has a grain to it that you can see when you see the original.
Is it
And then
black?
there's an etching. No, I think it's dark brown.
Yeah, it's dark brown.
And the words are done in an etching. I mean, he wrote on a plate. He scratched into a plate, I guess.
Yeah.
And I like the print a lot.
So this is up to the present. This is something that is a work in progress right now. Hasn't been published yet, but I thought it'd be interesting to see some of it. And this is a press that you've worked with a couple of times. You did a book with John Ashbery with them.
Right.
Graphic studio.
They're terrific. They'll go into any uncommercial, stupid thing I can think of, if it sounds interesting. Yeah, because the artist books are not a commercial venture primarily, and the one I did with John Ashbery, we really were going to. I wanted to compete with those European books, and pull out the stops, and they let us do whatever we wanted. And Vincent did the typography, and we had a lot of problems because to make the prints a certain size, what do you do with the words? Because if you make them big, gets like a children's book, And they were the daguerreotypes, that one, and they have like a plate mark on it. It's done like an etching, and I thought I'd have to put the words in it in a plate to hold them in and make them be able to use letters that weren't too large, and that worked out. And he was the guy who you pretty much designed it. You were there.
I chose the font, I
You
think.
chose the font.
Maybe the size.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so. You helped. You were really big on that. Anyhow, it worked out great. And this is the second one I'm doing with them, and they're in the process of printing it now.
And these are I wrote this text, and then I showed it to you, and I don't know if you did these. I think you did these
Yeah.
works in response to the text.
Yeah, when you write like the illustrations are parallel, not literal. You write something that's like you do illustrations that are sort of parallel the text rather than illustrate it.
Can you read this text? This one?
Let's see if I can see it. So it's called Swimming Home, and it's all kind of related to swimming. Head down under, swish, and light that couples. Daylight, and the stretch of arms, push, a turn, swishing, gulp, but fresh in the continued turn of your body through space. What attracts much more than particular physical attribute is attitude expressed in the cut of clothes, hair, way of walking, eyes' particularity. Character can attract, and moral compass, and of course power, though it can also repulse in its ways of money, success, or pure intellect. Just to see how it looks up close. I mean, we spent a lot of time on those issues, I think, the type, the spacing, and that publisher is very good about that. They really ask you to work on that. So like how far the lines are apart from one another.
Yeah, the leading
work on that
and
a lot.
also the cover, which is just nothing. But it's just a piece. It has no lettering on the cover. It's just gray.
What typeface is it?
It's Gil Sans.
We could probably go on. I mean, how much more stuff do you have there? Because I want to give people a chance to ask some questions, but we have
This
about
is
10
done.
minutes.
That's it.
And there's another thing we can play or not, the little video clip.
Oh yeah,
We can
which
do-
has
you wanna do
your
that after the
the
questions?
guy moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do that at the end, maybe.
I'll do it now.
Do it now?
Get rid of it.
I would say do it now. Yeah, get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Let's get rid
Good
of
way
it.
to put it. It's all about destruction.
Let's see. if I
They did a
figure out
well.
how to do this.
I'll let you talk about
Oh,
it.
go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, go ahead. This is, I mean, you can. This is online.
This is
can be seen,
online.
yeah.
It was published by a magazine that's quite amazing, in my opinion, called Esopus, which basically, it has a lot of projects, artistic projects or literary projects. Some of them are facsimile projects for each issue. And every section of the magazine is published on is printed on a different paper and a different design, some of them are die cut. I mean, it's an amazing object, this magazine. And Todd Lippy, the publisher and editor, wanted to do something with you.
Yeah, we had this thing we did years ago that no one seemed to want to publish.
We had done it. It was about 20 years. We did it in the 80s, mid-80s.
Yeah, it was 20 years old. It was just hanging around. And I figured, oh, boy, there's a chance to do it, you know.
And so, and then he said to us, you know, you can do it on any kind of paper you want.
Yeah.
You can, you know, it could be
transparent and fold out and collage. And so I said, in a book like that, I'd like to have it on plain white paper. And real good printing. Yeah. with a instead of I said, I don't want a Ben-Day, I want a line cut. So a line cut, there's no holes between it. You really get a physical black line like an etching. And that was it.
And then they had an event for their launch of this magazine, and Todd invited the actress Jennifer Jason Leigh to record the poem. So it became a slideshow with the images moving and her reading of the text. That's what this is. It's all on, I hope so.
Or Latin.
Yes. And if you can read that, can I have that? Still she desired in the name of matrimony because of the magnitude of the outrageousness that has to do with
autographs. 1. Vain wish, clogged valve, August, lust, peach tree, denim, where is she? Bulge, blueberries and cream, Olympics right now with someone else, hot, humid. 2. Moved, unmoving, gentle, light autumn, the past, unreal as cartoon, why she did it, moving, telephone, sweating mist, country so far from life, her. 3. Sunglasses, lips, diaphragm, mist, charm, delight, these what make you you. Please, with light conversation, smiles, stone steps, afternoon, unique, fucking, this one, us. 4. Contumely, can't believe you did what you did. Windows splashed, shutters, blinds, petal freshness, but sudden harsh tinge of changing age, vulgar, death even. 5. Vivid sculpture on grass, vodka, kiss, the same as another's. My hubris is painful, but it'll take more than you to bring me low. 6. Unaccustomed, she takes delight deep as cold and filling, then a simple calm feeling of youth, afternoon by warm lake, running back and forth. 7. Running it back and forth in my mind, we each did something, she moved, I saw, it opened between us, a voluptuary always chooses. 8. Destiny, or the greater attraction of forbidden pleasures. Donizetti on radio, mackerel and spaghetti for lunch, cows in field, your body in my mind. 9. Where are you? You. Quiet times, swallowing, happy. Hand, on knee, on bus, in winter, dark, early, warm. Let's have the dream. 10. My main concern is what you did and how you feel you are my best friend. Did you know? That's what's real. And so. 11. Is it you? You. Is it? Our bodies loving. That was love. Not what they think about it. You. Are you? Are you? Are. 12. It could be a pink maiden, say, or ragged robin, shooting star even. But no, it's a simple willow, not weeping now, about to blossom.
Any questions or answers from the audience? You disappoint me, especially you. I thought so.
It is apropos of the collaboration between word and image. I see that the text often seems to be normal typeface of one sort or another, like those. In other cases, it looked quite different, as though the text was actually drawn or written by hand. And I wondered whether that was in fact the case. You understand what I mean? The difference between basically there were two types of text that went with these images, and I wonder how the text was actually achieved, whether it was printed or drawn, and if so, who wrote them.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Maybe I'm not clear.
No, it is. It's a good question because I think one of the things I learned from my father was a love for lettering. That was one of the things that you studied in art school that I think you learned from, that you've spoken about, and also just the artistry of typefaces and what they mean, how they work. So anytime I think either of us is involved in a book project, that's one of the main concerns, is what typeface, what size, what density. And then I personally have been involved with the hand, using how does the hand writing a poem, what does that add to somebody's experience of a poem. So in a couple of examples we saw that was my handwriting doing the poems.
I wanted to stress that, Vincent, I mean, I know you didn't give me these to advertise, you gave me these as gifts, but this is a magazine that you publish.
Yes.
Maybe that you and Vivian both publish. I'm not sure. Yeah, right. I mean that's just a beautiful magazine which has artwork in it, which has poems, and it's called Vanitas. And so I don't know. I just wanted to mention that because you're also really involved in the publishing side of things too, because you have your own publishing company.
I do, and I think that comes from a tradition too, maybe going back even farther, but what I grew up observing in the 1960s and 1970s, which were the poets, what they call the second generation New York school, and the Mimeo Revolution. And so they published their own magazines very cheaply and very quickly, but they were friends with some artists, and you get an artwork maybe by Philip Guston on the cover of a stapled Mimeo magazine that could be produced in 3 weeks, and that to me was kind of an ideal of how poetry could function. And there is a communal aspect to that. You publish people that that you respect, and then they might publish you, and it's I think the poetry world really thrives on that kind of self-publishing.
So is the academic world, I guess, because there's, mainly writing for small publications like that. Were there?
use of word and image together has a long history, I'm sure you all know. And somewhere in the 15th century, there was a dramatic change from what are called banderoles, long before there were bubbles and other things, but banderoles that were carrying the message of the meaning. There were titles, there were kind of explanatory things that took you to texts, but they had no kind of personality of their own. And then around 1465, the banderoles got bigger, and there was a balance between the figures. They were almost as big as the figures. There was a balance between what was being said and what the figural representation was. And what I saw in the very first example that you showed with empty, what I would call banderoles, is the final denouement of this marvelous tradition, where the lack of the text in the banderole is the point, and it responds by responding with text. I found it totally remarkable.
That's interesting.
Empty balloons.
Yeah.
So, back to the idea of the collaboration. When those pieces were Alex, where you created with the think bubbles there, clearly you were creating a piece that, in terms of its fulfillment as a completed object or a completed piece, you sort of got 3/4 of the way there or 90% there, but we're leaving a space. And then when you're creating in the context of a collaboration, Vincent, and you're writing something, do you write it in a way that you foresee your father's work or the person that you're working with is going to complete that? Because in some way, I guess with the Rudy Burckhardt work, some of it was actually descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's just sort of more meditative and already complete, but in other cases, I think.
And tell you on that, I learned about that in theater, where I was given 2 plays to do. They wanted me to do the sets and the costumes. And one was a Frank O'Hara play, and the other was a Leroy Jones play. And on paper, the Leroy Jones play was just really pedestrian. The Frank O'Hara play was fabulous. And I just couldn't see doing the Leroy Jones, and it was a package, so I stepped out of it. And then when I saw the Leroy Jones thing on stage, it was terrific. And he left space for the actors, whereas the Frank O'Hara play is all rhetorical. You can just line them up. And so I think that works in theater. You have to you leave space. You also don't want to be a decorator, you know. And by that I mean when you do theater or thing, you're going to do something that if the other artist doesn't come up to it, he's going to not look good. You step out, you know. With it, with all theater stuff I've done has been that way, and with the, it's less so with the book stuff, but it is there. Most of the stuff is has a lot of styling energy. You know, in other words, it doesn't look like books you've seen before. And if the writer's going to write something that looks like stuff you've seen before, he's going to look real dull.
I think that was an interesting question, and I think that for me it's been, as I said before, many different cases. The book, A Tremor in the Morning, those were just poems that existed on their own. They were just written as poems. Swimming Home, the one that we're working on right now, I wrote them on my own, but I think very quickly it became something that I proposed that we do something with. And as you mentioned, the Rudy Burckhardt book is the most extreme example. I've often thought about that I don't know whether, in fact, I don't think a lot of those poems could live on their own without the photographs. They're so linked to the photographs. but as you pointed out, I did them afterwards, and he didn't. He'd done them decades before, so he wasn't leaving space for me. But there is always that leaving space in the collaboration, even when you are putting the things together. Because Rudy Burckhardt was somebody who collaborated a lot, whether it was in films or performances or in books. And so he was very open, and he liked other people's ideas, but he also drew the line. It kind of surprised me a couple of times. I collaborated with him on a film, and he shot a dancer in the woods, and it was a great scene. And he liked to use Bach a lot in his movies, and he put this harpsichord piece, and I thought it was a little bit schematic, like just dancer in the woods, Bach harpsichord piece. And I had been listening to this Ellie Ameling record of a different piece that was more lush, and I said, "Oh, let's try this." And he's like, "Okay, let's try it." And he put it on, and he said, "Oh, no, it's much too beautiful." So the quiet, reserved Rudy had a strong aesthetic.
Well, next time we'll talk more about Paul Taylor too, because we didn't get to that. But anyway, this was really great, and thank you so much, and thank you all for coming again.
That's good. Yeah. That's right time. No, that's plenty.